Bruce Davidson, President of Asset Management for RREAF Holdings, and welcome to the overview of our asset management department. Asset management, in my opinion, at RREAF is probably one of the most important groups that we have, given the fact that we oversee every aspect of our investment once it's closed. And we act as the gatekeeper between not only our holding company, but as a fiduciary to all of our investors who place their trust in our investment opportunities. Asset management is broken into 4 subgroups within the overall department, and we'll touch upon what each department does as we go along. But we have an analytics group, we have investor relations, we have capital expenditures, and then we have asset management. Our analytics team is really focused on handling our financials that come in through on a monthly basis that come from our property management company, and work alongside our asset managers to take that financial information, drop it into our trackers that we ultimately will have uploaded into our Power BI system, in which gives us a great overview of how our assets are performing. A lot of the work that we do in asset management is contained in our procedure manual, which provides anybody within our team a great guideline on how to be successful in what they do, whether they're in the analytics group or in the asset management group. However, in my view, and given the fact that I've been doing this for a long time, having a manual to set up success is great, but always there's going to be issues that come up that nobody really thinks about, and it's hard to incorporate into a manual. So that comes with experience, it comes with time, and it also comes with just different economic conditions that we may run into. But the part of the manual that's really important, there's tables in where each person in our group every day can look at the manual and understand what they need to do on a weekly, a monthly, a quarterly, and an annual basis. So for example, in our analytics team, on a weekly basis, they're receiving financials both from our residential property management company as well as our hotel operators, and we'll drop that into our financial trackers, which ultimately gets uploaded to Power BI. Every month, they'll collect the monthly financial statements, and again, that gets dropped into our workbooks that our asset managers will review and sign off on. On a quarterly basis, our analytics team is responsible to work with each individual who's overseeing assets and work and put together the updated waterfall model for potential distributions out to our investors. And then on an annual basis, they work with the rest of the team on property budgets that are set and approved by asset management, and they get uploaded into our financial workbook, so we continually having updated information provided to not only our asset management team for senior management here at RREAF. The second aspect of with respect to just the hierarchy of the overall department, as I mentioned earlier, I'm president of asset management. With the 4 groups that I outlined, we also have directors in each of those groups. And under those directors, they each have a team of people. So we have a hierarchy in which our senior asset managers, our analysts will all report up through directors of their individual responsibilities and ultimately report up through me. So it actually provides some really good synergy and work. But the way this team works is everybody not only is responsible for their assets, but there's very good team collaboration. So as we talk about we mentioned about the analytics team. Now I'm going to actually go, and probably the crux of asset management is the people who actually manage assets on a day-to-day basis. And the way we've set this up as far as responsibilities, and I like to describe this in a way where each individual who oversees a portfolio of assets is the CEO of those assets. So that specific individual is responsible for managing and maximizing value at the end of the day. That's really the key to asset management. We have a business plan at acquisitions. Asset management, once that deal closes, takes that business plan, implements it, and at the end of the day, we need to maximize value for the ultimate exit of any particular investment. So it's extremely important those individuals understand that. And as we look through our manual, there's tons of data in here which will make, as I said earlier, somebody very successful in what they need to do on a day-to-day basis. However, part of asset management happens where our role, we get involved as the asset's closing because we actually onboard the asset. And what is onboard meaning? So when a deal actually closes, all the documents that are necessary with respect to an investment are gathered. And as you can see that in our manual, that particular asset manager, he or she will need to go to all these different departments. So they will have to go to acquisitions, our IR team, our property management team. They will have to reach out to both our insurance and tax consultants, work with all the documents that are necessarily to set up all of our respective trackers, and go to legal for all the legal docs. As you can see, there's a fair amount of documentation that's required here. But when a deal closes, this is what the asset manager is supposed to do, and onboard the deal and set it up in our file system, which is outlined in the manual. Now, on a day-to-day basis, each asset manager kind of understands what they need to do. Outlined in our tables here as far as what they have to do with respect to property taxes, whether they're paid annually, quarterly, and coordinate with property management, whether it's on a hotel deal and or a hospitality deal. We also have land deals that have to be monitored for the same deal, respect to taxes and insurance. And there's certain things that also come into play with outside of taxes and insurance. So for example, on a monthly basis on our residential properties, each asset manager is responsible for reviewing financials, coordinating meetings with property management to make sure not only are we tracking within business plan and budget, but also if there's any concerns with respect to the market itself that could have effect on rents, as well as the expense side of the ledger. And those are day-to-day discussions that is expected of an asset manager. Making sure that our file systems are taken care of. On a hospitality deal, it's a little bit different than our residential because hotel has a little bit, because it's an underlying operating business and a real estate investment, our asset managers need to really understand that. So with respect to the comparison between residential and the hotel, we're receiving daily information on a hotel because as a hotel room is rented by the day, where a multifamily is leased out on an annual basis generally. And we're receiving daily information from our hotels with respect to ADR and occupancy, average daily rate and occupancy of the hotel. And all that's being tracked by the asset manager. That also then gets dropped into our analytics team. And then on a monthly basis, we expect to have Smith Travel reports, which are generally hotel performance reports, reviewed by the asset manager. And not only does it give you information on our existing asset, but it also reviews information on respective comparable properties that we compete with. So it's extremely, extremely important that our asset management team continues to have dialogue with both inside parties as well as outside parties with respect to investments. Because as I said earlier, the bottom line of what we're supposed to do is we need to maximize value for our asset, because ultimately that's going to make us some money. Then outside of, most of our investments are in pretty much three categories. It's in residential, multifamily, it's in hospitality, and it's in ground up or land acquisitions. And on our land acquisitions, there's not a lot of deep dive day-to-day aspects of what you need to do for asset management. However, there's certain tracking that you need to do. Taxes, insurance, understanding what that land, what the highest and best use for that land is going to be, and really understand the business plan on whether you're going to develop the land or you're going to end up selling it, but really understanding what the business plan is. On ground up development, there's a little bit more nuance that goes into just owning land, because there is a business plan. Whether you're going to develop a multifamily deal or a hospitality deal, you really need to understand the business plan. And then part of the whole ground up development aspect is you get involved in construction draws and monitoring, and so there's a little bit more of a nuance that goes into a ground up, which eventually will flip over to an existing operating asset, which at that point will then follow our tracking system and tables on what you need to do on a day-to-day basis. Construction does get a little bit tricky because of the draws and understanding what happens. And I think when you look at some of the ground up development deals, the business plan generally is never the same when you go in day one, because it's always changing, because there's a lot of things that evolve over time. But there's a lot of experience around the table who's done this before. So again, part of that whole team collaboration with respect to what happens during the life of an asset. We talked about onboarding earlier. Part of this also on a daily basis and a monthly basis for the asset managers, given the fact that both our residential and hotels have some CapEx work to be done, and most of our business plan with respect to the residential has some value add components to it, meaning that we're doing some type of upgrades to units. We are doing some upgrades to overall property, and all that ties into, well, how do you pay for it? And part of this group, we oversee the reserve accounts that are generally funded at closing for that particular asset. Acquisitions and underwriting puts together a budget that usually is reviewed and signed off on by property management and asset management. And during the life of the investment, there's going to be times where there's going to be requests for money to be drawn down on and funded to the property to do these unit upgrades, or on a hospitality property to do some potential room upgrades and furniture and fixtures, etc. So each asset manager, as I mentioned, they are the CEO. And part of this process is that they have to review the draw package. They work with property management on what's being done on that particular time. And then ultimately, they have responsibility of signing off and funding that investment. If there's any issues or there's a change in budget and business plan, which certainly is possible, then at that point, that particular asset management person would need to sit with myself, go over it, and we would make a decision on whether we're going to fund it, whether we're going to shift some money around, or we need to make some type of additional capital call that would be necessary to meet that expenditure. But generally, going into these deals, we have a set budget. We kind of know what happens. But like I said, there are times where the business plan has to be changed, modified, however you want to kind of say that. Usually within the whole asset management aspect of when you look at what ends up happening as far as updates, working across multiple disciplines, not only within asset management, but within RREAF itself, the asset manager has to certainly follow a lot of the guidelines that we put in place, because that does fall into what ends up happening at the time we close on a transaction to the moment we exit. And part of the responsibilities, not only updating trackers or reviewing and providing updates to our analytics team on the trackers, but also during the life of the investment, understanding the market that particular asset is located, understanding how those markets are performing, and then ultimately looking at an opportunity for an exit or capital event. So we have our team not only reach out to third-party brokers to understand where our particular asset is valued at a certain moment in time, but also there's opportunities for refinance events based on performance of those individual properties. So the asset management team will coordinate with our acquisitions team on reaching out to third-party brokers, but overall, the recommendation of a potential sale and or refinance will be provided by the asset manager themselves and presented to senior management at investment committee. And there are some distinctions of what we do between asset management and property management, because property management, at the end of the day, they handle everything that happens on site. That is their role. Asset management works very closely with them, but there's some different types of things that happen certainly on a daily basis. So as I mentioned earlier, we're responsible for taxes and insurance. However, we're also responsible during and after closing prorations on a particular asset. We are also responsible for all financial management with respect to the property itself. We're responsible for distributions to investors, and that goes back to what we were talking about, a waterfall review by our analytics team that has to be coordinated by each individual asset manager, and review construction or CapEx draws. So there's a lot of information that I'm probably going over, and again, it's a high-level overview. But as we go through this, and as we go through this opportunity on training, as people have questions, always feel free to reach out and we can discuss it. Now, within as I keep referring to, there's set monthly, quarterly, and annual review that an asset manager needs to do. And there's things here within our department that are extremely important as far as somebody being successful. And these are things that are set. On a monthly basis, we have to update all our asset trackers, sit down with property management to go over performance, check replacement reserves to make sure there's adequate funds, review financials, and every once in a while, which good thing we don't, every once in a while we will have assets that have some issues, and we will have a monthly asset focus meeting, which is with senior management, in which asset managers will report on status of why we're in asset focus, what we need to do to improve performance, and there are also opportunities that'll present itself where we may need to do some additional capital calls. In addition to that, we have quarterly responsibilities that need to go over to investor relations, and One of the most important quarterly quarterly responsibilities is writing quarterly reports on all of our investments. Each asset manager is responsible to do that. They provide it to our investor relations team, who reviews it and will eventually send those reports out to our investors. They're also responsible to execute distributions that will also go out to our investors, assuming there's distributions available from those properties. On an annual basis, it's expected that each asset manager will visit their properties once a year, if not more, review any market rents for changes, and that's in conjunction with property management, update and review operating budgets set by property management, both on hotels and residential. That's the asset manager responsibility to sit down with those parties, review those new annual budgets for the next year, sign off on it, and implement it. And then on an as-needed basis, we onboard any new assets. Those come on quite a bit, work and close the deal with the closing team and onboard appropriately. We're also responsible for lender compliance. So there's another aspect of this which we didn't touch upon. Most of our deals have financing, both senior debt and preferred equity investments, and there are reporting and compliance covenants within those documents that each asset manager is responsible to not only understand how that works, because they're expected, and I hope they read all the loan docs and the operating agreements with all our preferred equity partners, but they're responsible for making sure that that information is sent out timely to those respective lenders. And we also then have the opportunity on an as-needed basis where there are dispositions that will happen over the course of any given time frame, where each asset manager will be responsible to work to make sure that those deals not only get signed up under PSA, but follow the period from the time a PSA is signed to the time we exit the investment. So that, in a high level aspect, which we could talk about for a long time, is what a lot of the asset managers do on a day-to-day basis. There's a lot more that goes into this, but I'm trying to just give a very high-level overview. I mentioned before that there's 4 groups. I touched upon analytics. I touched upon asset management. We also have a capital expenditures group. That individual who runs CapEx, he coordinates with property management to not only solicit bids from potential contractors, he will review and present to each individual asset manager to go over the proposal and sign off on it, and then the CapEx eventually will then be implemented by that individual and will oversee our team on the ground at each property as those projects occur. We try to set up in-person meetings at least on a quarterly basis, but all asset managers on their CapEx projects should be in touch and coordinating with our person who heads up our CapEx program. And the last department that falls under asset management is investor relations. Investor relations is an extremely important piece of the puzzle here. They are front-facing to a lot of our retail investors who put a lot of trust in RREAF. We have a lot of multiple-time investors in a lot of different deals, and they expect not only updates on performance, but IR will handle questions that come in from our investors, work with our team to get distributions out, and on any given new deal, they are working with our investors to raise the equity in order for us to close on transactions. But there's a lot of coordination that has to happen, and flow of information, and information has to be right in order to go out to our investors once investor relations does it. So really the theme of everything that we've been talking about for the last probably 20 to 30 minutes is there has to be coordination amongst the 4 separate groups within asset management. Communication is key, no matter what you do in life. My view on handling and overseeing investments of this nature is you have to communicate.